Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Here are 10 stories from my book, Senior Stories. They're each about 2 or 3 minutes long. The first one is called Chicken. I worked in a chicken plant. You get used to the smell and the noise, but it is cold in there. And when you get old like me, you get cold, so I retired. I got bored pretty quick, but I had an idea. What if I wrote to CNN and asked them to come down to Arkansas and I'll give them a tour around? They like doing stories on poor folk. They ignored my letter, but I made a little video on my phone and I showed them the killing room and I showed them the workers. I showed them what we call the dressing room and wouldn't you know it, they came down. After it came on the TV, I got a call from some politics guy in Washington, D.C., asking me if I would come to the presidential convention and say a few words. I said no, but my wife screamed at me, "You are such a damn chicken! Yeah, it's kind of funny for a chicken worker, but you..." Anyway, she pointed a finger at me. "You are a talker! You talk my ear off! And now you're going to go talk those ears off down in Washington! You are going and I am coming with you to make sure you get on that damn plane, you chicken!" Well, I think you see, I didn't have no choice but to go. So I said a few words about the good working folk who don't get much attention. But we are pretty important. Would people like to do without chicken? After I left the stage, a guy in some fancy suit asked if I might run for Congress against somebody he called, I think, a vulnerable in combat. I had no idea what the hell that was, but what the heck. I was retired and I had nothing to do. They coached me, and they sent campaign people down from up north, and they spent a lot of money on commercials. They even gave me a slogan, "Chicken Charlie won't lay an egg." And wouldn't you know it, I won by just a chicken feather, but I won. Congress? Me? I had no earthly idea what the hell to do there. So I just mainly listened, and I was grateful for the advice those people in the suits kept giving me. I voted like they told me to, although a couple of times I couldn't begin to understand what I was voting for. And CNN even did another thing on me. Would you believe the interviewer? And she was right nice. Asked me if I might run for president. Bless your heart. Anyway, that's Chicken. The next story is called Sam's Last Concert. In the wings, Sam could hear the concertmaster tuning up the orchestra. "Damn, my hand is shaking more than usual. It's a bad Parkinson's day. Plus it's my last concert, I'm nervous. Glad I decided on the Grieg, but with these hands, nothing's easy." Sam had been a concert pianist his whole life. At age 11, he finished 4th in the Midwest Regional Young Artists Competition, and now at age 83 had performed 45 concerts, including one with the Kansas City Symphony. He thought, true, that was just in the KC Symphony's summer festival when lots of the A players were on vacation, but still, somehow I wish my ex-wife were here. How could she have dumped me? I still wish she were here tonight. Do I play it safe? Making a lot of note mistakes would make the audience think I stayed at it too long, like those star baseball players who would rather hit 200 than retire. Or do I go for a home run? A chance at a write-up in the Kansas City Star. Roseman finishes with a flourish. The conductor gave Sam a forced smile and strode on stage. This is it. Deep breaths, deep breaths. Damn, my hands are shaking more. I'm taking too long. I gotta get out there. Stand up straight. Old men hunt stride. Don't shuffle. But Sam could manage only to shuffle on stage. He hung onto the piano with one hand as he bowed his head to the audience. If I tried to bow from the waist, I could fall. And Sam sat down at the piano. I've had this moment so many times, but this is different. Sam used his old trick of adjusting the seat up and then back down again, not because it needed adjusting, but to buy a little more time to ground himself before the moment of truth. And Sam began, and took every reasonable risk he could, and most of the time he won. Yeah, his boldness caused a few note mistakes, but only the ignorant or mean-spirited could criticize his exciting performance. It was inspiring at any age, but for an 83-year-old with advanced Parkinson's, it gives me the chills just to tell you about it. And yeah, Sam got not just the usual obligatory extended applause, bestowed as much to protest classical music's dying popularity as to acknowledge the performer, but fervent applause, and then, yes, a standing ovation. Not a charity ovation, a heartfelt one. And Sam, who usually was too shy to look at the applauding audience and so would stare at the back wall, soaked in the smiling, standing people. Then he sighed and plodded off stage for what he thought was the last time. Sam shuffled into his dressing room, closed the door, and dropped into a chair. I survived. I didn't embarrass myself. Oh, but I can't go to the reception. That's like a retirement party where everyone tries to make light of it being the beginning of the end. My end. There was a knock on the door. Daddy! His daughter opened the door and goes, You were amazing! You were really amazing! Come on, they're all waiting for you! Sam knew there was no avoiding it, so he trudged downstairs. When he arrived, the chatter morphed into applause. He thought, No one likes long speeches and nothing ungracious. I should be a good boy. But he couldn't resist saying what he really felt. Honestly, I can't stand the thought that this will be my last performance. And he teared up. Just then, a 4-year-old toddled up to him. Do you want to play in my class? And Sam Roseman went on to play more concerts than he had in his entire life, in preschools and elementary schools, first just locally, then around the country. He never got paid, indeed had to pay his travel expenses, but he didn't begrudge it. I can't think of a better way to spend my money than to teach kids to love classical music, and that old people aren't necessarily irrelevant. Anyway, that story's called Sam's Last Concert. The next one's called Grumpy. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and Joe was about to return to the office building in downtown San Francisco where he had worked for 22 years. But today, for the first time, at age 72, he decided to not go back to work, but to take the afternoon off, just because. After phoning his boss to say he needed a few hours to himself, Joe simply started walking, taking in the sights and sounds. And here were his thoughts as he walked. Tattoos. Ugly defacing of the human body, and it takes a year of painful treatments to undo, which may not work. So choosing to have a tattoo is usually a lifetime decision, including long after the tattoo is faded, but the tattoo hasn't. Hip-hop, electronic music, modern classical music. Ugly. Annoying. How could anyone like that better than You'll Never Walk Alone, or Eptide, or The Shadow of Your Smile? Joe looked at the headlines at the newspaper stand. So much emphasis on helping those have-nots. We used to call them bums, hoodlums, lazy, juvenile delinquents. Then we started to externalize their responsibility by calling them the underclass. Now we use terms that completely externalize responsibility. Disadvantaged, underprivileged, vulnerable, underserved. How about honoring the excellent? That's what inspires. And investing in the best and brightest is more likely to make a difference. Google, iPhone, ChatGPT, cardiac stents. That's going to make a difference more than spending yet more on the intractable underclass. In the past half-century alone, we have spent $22 trillion, and the achievement gap is as wide as ever. He continued to walk. So many young adults are on the streets during a weekday. I feel sorry for them. Unless you're a tech whiz, there are fewer and fewer good jobs, and automation and offshoring can only increase. And with home prices propped up by the techno-rich and the Chinese buying up prime U.S. real estate, few young people will ever afford a home. Yet the government and media seems to pay more attention to which bathroom a transgender person can use. Then there are the young people I have little sympathy for. Here they are on a Wednesday at 1:30 in the afternoon, quote, protesting. They're chatting, they're giggling with each other as they desultorily hung up a sign bearing some bumper sticker rhetoric. They're not actually committed to anything more than not working. Their protesting is merely a socially acceptable way of doing nothing other than video games or craftsy hobbies or sports or yoga mats, meditation, essential oils, rather than doing what their parents and grandparents did. Do what it takes to earn a living, even if it isn't doing what you love. The vast majority of jobs are just that, jobs that make the world run. Unless you're a tech whiz or a very talented artist or leader, nobody's going to pay you to follow your passion. I'm tempted to yell at them. Earn your living. Don't be a parasite on your parents or on the taxpayer. Me. He continued to walk. Look at that gridlock. They want to force us out of our cars into mass transit that sucks more hours from our already overpacked days. So they build no new freeways. They convert existing ones into toll roads, turn car lanes into bicycle lanes that no one uses, repave streets that don't need repaving so they can say they're spending on roads, and they set up carpool lanes that sit underutilized because who the hell can every day get 3 people who live near you and work near you to ride with you? And so all the traffic gets compressed into fewer lanes, there's more gridlock, more pollution. Crazy! He continues to walk. So many billboards, songs, and movies glorify casual sex. I'm no prude, but is hookup culture really good for people? Doesn't it encourage the shallowest of relationships? Doesn't it accelerate the already lamentable decline in a couple's sexuality over time? And the marriage rate is down. Can that be good for kids? It's hard enough to raise a child with 2 parents, but with one? And revolving door Tinder lovers? And look at all those people wearing designer labels, especially those bicyclist jerseys. How silly that people are willing to be walking billboards for corporations, which many of these people claim to hate. Hey, look at all of those obese people in an area dubbed a food desert by the excuse makers, eating fast food when there is a market or a bodega right there, selling fruits and vegetables right there outside. Not only are my tax dollars expected to pay for their medical expenses when they get sick, because there is a shortage of doctors, operating rooms, and so on, it cost me my life. Joe returned home, made himself a cup of coffee, sat in his easy chair, listened to Frank Sinatra singing Autumn Leaves, and thought, "A time immemorial, old people denigrate the next generation, even though, despite retracements, things inexorably get better. I am old. It's time to step aside." Anyway, so that's called Grumpy. Next story is called Good Deed. Definitely a more upbeat one. "Hey, Dominic, give me the big one. Yeah, the one in the corner." That's what got me started. I used to just give people the next slice in the pie. But then I thought I'd personalize it. I'd give the big guys the biggest slices. The skinny malinks, a little one. You know, those size 2s, they want to stay tiny. And if I wasn't sure which piece they wanted, I'd ask them. And if I liked them, I would toss a piece of sausage, a mushroom, whatever on there, like as a gift. They loved that. So I started putting a piece on everyone's slice. The owner didn't mind. Cost them almost nothing, and it got him more customers. I think some people actually bought a second slice to see what I'd put on it. When they knew I'd be doing that, they made requests. But I refuse to put pineapple on. It is a sin to put pineapple on pizza. I'd have to go to confession, which I do not like to do. After a while, like the bartender at Angelo's down the street, I know people's regular order, like Vito, pepperoni, Carmela, mushrooms, Jose, olives. I did that for like 20 years. But I'm not the ambitious type. But when Carlo, he's the owner, said he was tired, and asked if I want to buy the business, I said, "You crazy? I can't afford nothing with the wife and 3 kids. I said, "Thanks, but no thanks." But I told Sal Monte, he's a regular, that I felt good that Carlo had made me the offer, and he hung around the store, and everyone who came in, he said, "Hey, Carlo's tired. You want to give 50, 100, 500 so Dom could buy the store?" I couldn't believe it, but Sal raised $9,250. Carlo wanted 10 grand, but he said, forget about it. As long as you change the name from Carlo's Pizza to Dom's Pizza. So for the next 20 years, I ran Dom's Pizza. But I'm old now, so I just gave the business to Maria, who's been working here for 5 years. As I gave her the deed to the business, she said, "Good deed." It's funny, right? I hope she changes the name to Maria's Pizza. Anyway, that's called Good Deed. The next story is called No Soap. A few months ago, my husband and I escaped from the big city to a cottage 15 miles northeast of Grants Pass, Oregon. I have just one neighbor, a couple and their kid, who also wanted to escape the urban madness. I say I because 2 months ago my dear husband of 51 years died. Now it's just me, my doggy Angel, and my soap operas, especially Days of Our Lives, which I've been watching since I was 15. Angel sits on my lap and we laugh and we cry. My best friends are the Days of Our Lives characters, especially dear Maggie and her late husband Mickey. Maggie has been on the show since 1973, and Mickey died in 2010. I'm still grieving, and yeah, watching the reruns. I stream. I talk to the TV, urging the characters, consoling the characters. Okay, I also talk to my doggy. For example, Angel. I hate to admit it, but I like you better than most people. I can always count on your kindness and your cuddles. All I need to do is give you kibble. Out here in the wilderness, I don't even need to walk you. You just go outside the doggy door. And I know you'll love me, so you won't run away. You'll always come back. Just like my Jerry. It was an unusually windy rainstorm, so I was especially grateful to be in my soft chair with Angel on my lap. We were watching Days of Our Lives' 50th anniversary show for the third time. Maggie had become crippled, and Mickey gave her red shoes, hoping that someday they would dance again. And then the power went out. With the howling wind and the sheets of rain, Angel and I needed to stay inside and hoped the power would come back on soon. But out in the boonies, I knew that was an unlikely hope. After a day cooped up and no TV, you can imagine how I felt when someone knocked on my door. Who could have come out in this weather? When I opened the door, it was my neighbor's 12-year-old son. "Come in, please." I would have thought he'd race in, shoulders hunched, though he just shuffled in without a word. "I've rarely seen you. Why would you come out in this mess?" "My parents made me. They said you were old and I should check on you." "I am old, but I'm okay, except it's not fun having no electricity. Can I get you some cookies?" He nodded. After wolfing one, he murmured, "I really should be going." "Of course you can, but you want to tell me a little bit about you?" "I don't know. I'm 12. My name is Harris." I thought, but didn't say, "Oh my God, Harris is the name of an evil character on Days of Our Lives, a kidnapper and attempted murderer." But I just said, "Harris, that's a nice name." Just then the lights came back on. Angel danced around. She seemed happier than I was. And Harris said, "Well, I guess I should go now." "Want to watch a little TV with me?" We don't have TV, so okay." "Would you mind if we watch Days of Our Lives? I stream it so I can watch whatever episode I want, whenever I want." He shrugged. "I know all the episodes, so I chose one in which a preteen boy is the main character. Because Harris was distant, I picked the one in which Theo is diagnosed with autism." Harris stared and then got teary. I asked if he wanted to talk about it. He shook his head and said, I should go now." I said, "You can come back if you'll watch another episode." For the first time he smiled, and he left, walking just a bit straighter. I lifted Angel onto my lap, and after I finish writing this, we're going to watch another episode. Okay, so that one is called No Soap. This next one is called My Life's Favorite Moment. I didn't want the kids to know that I was watching them play touch football on the street, so every afternoon after school, which is when I knew they played, I just walked slower as I passed by. It took just a few minutes to see who was the worst player. On the rare times a quarterback threw to him, he'd usually drop the ball. On the rarer times he got to play quarterback, his arm was weak and inaccurate, and today, when they chose sides, he didn't even get picked. And he slung on his heavy backpack filled with so many textbooks that they stuck out at the top. When I used to coach, I spent most of my time helping the best players make the most of their talent. Yet now I found myself attracted to this kid, the worst. But what the hell? Could I coach him to be a kicker? Could I actually help him? Would he want help? Maybe he'd even be offended that I offered. But this would be the time. He was walking away, almost right past me. "Hey, kid." "Yeah, I know this seems weird, but I was a former assistant football coach at the high school, and I've been watching you guys. I think you have the potential to be a field goal kicker for the high school team." "Why would you think that?" "Two reasons. First, you're persistent. You keep coming out even though you're picked last and get made fun of. Field goal kickers need persistence. Practice, practice, practice. As important, you're calm when you screw up or even when a player razzes you. That's critical. When a stadium full of fans are screaming at you, you have to be ice, calmly doing your kicking ritual as though the stadium were empty. I don't need money. I'm just looking for something meaningful to do. Would you like me to coach you a bit? Maybe try one short lesson. We'll see how it goes. Brandon's face softened, but nervous, embarrassed. He said, I have to do my homework. I can see you're pretty studious. Your backpack was the most packed of all the kids. But if you had been picked, you would have stayed to play. Brandon blushed at having gotten caught and said, I guess we can try it, but please, I don't want the kids to see. Well, we can walk to the high school field. It's summer, so it's empty now. There's no need to bore you with the details, but long story short, I taught him the field goal kicking technique, and then he practiced with ever longer field goals. Actually, we started with the point after touchdown, just 13 yards, then 20 yards, 25, 30, 35, 40, and then 45. By the end of the summer, Brandon could make 80% from 40 yards out and 60% from 45. So I could honestly suggest he try out for the high school junior varsity. He did, and asked if I could sit in the stands to watch. Well, normally tryouts are closed, but as a former assistant coach, I was confident the coach would allow it. In fact, the coach allowed me to sit next to him on the bench. Brandon made 2 of 2 at 25 yards and at 35. Then the coach pushed it to 45. Brandon looked at me for just a moment. Longer would have made both of us more nervous. He missed the first by a lot, but then he took 3 deep breaths and made the second. Barely. He of the don't show emotion school just smiled at me, and I mirrored him. Right then, the coach told me he had made the team. He would be the junior varsity's backup field goal kicker. We went out for ice cream, and what surprised me was what he said was he was most looking forward to, putting on the uniform. He said, it'll make me feel good that I'm not just a brainiac. I went to every game, but the first-string kicker was pretty good, and Brandon just sat on the bench. Then one Saturday morning, Brandon phoned to say the coach had just called him to say that the first-string kicker was at a party last night, and to show off to a girl he was trying to impress while holding a drink, he jumped from the second-floor apartment into the swimming pool, except he didn't quite make it. His thigh hit the edge of the pool, and the doctor said he'd be out for a game. For today's game, I would be the field goaler, he said to me. Now, not every game requires a field goal kicker. Sometimes the team makes touchdowns. It was too far for a field goal, but I was hopeful. I sat in my usual spot, and although Brandon's team was way behind in the fourth quarter, there was the first field goal situation, a 42-yarder. Brandon looked down not at the players, certainly not at me, just at the ball. He took those 3 breaths, followed the technique, and the ball went up and through the uprights. Then, before he even looked at the players or the coach, he looked at me and nodded. That thank you is my life's favorite moment. Okay, that story is my life's favorite moment. The next one is called Closing. The year was 1991. Although Alex rarely made Salesperson of the Month, he was always at least middle of the pack. But as he passed age 60, his sales dwindled, and at age 70, he had a heart attack and retired. The office threw him the requisite reminiscence and roasting party, and Alex retreated to a life of long breakfasts, photography, and doctor's appointments. But sad at his uselessness, Alex asked his former boss if he could sit at a desk weekday mornings, when most of the agents were out prospecting or not working. Alex showed up every morning at 9. He would do crossword puzzles while listening to talk radio or Broadway show tunes. For his birthday, his daughter had given him a senior-friendly cell phone that she loaded with his favorite songs. One morning, while listening to Bally High and immersed in the local newspaper's crossword, the New York Times ones, make weird ones that with words that no one needs to know, he was startled by a tap on the shoulder. It was a beautiful 25-year-old. Hi, my name's Rebecca. Are you a real estate agent? His license was still active, so he nodded. I'm looking to buy a house, but don't know if I can afford what I want. It can be small, but I grew up in an apartment that looked out to a gas station, so I'd love a view. With the wisdom that sometimes comes with age, Alex asked, wouldn't you be more compatible with an agent who's closer to your age? Rebecca replied, I've never met a salesperson who tries to talk me out of buying from him, especially a big-ticket item. You're honest, so I'd like to hire you. That energized even the tired Alex, and he summoned all his energy to try to find a home that would work for her. Of course, they combed the multiple listings website and other online sources. Of course, he drove her to many possibilities, but none worked. So then every day, Alex spent hours by himself driving every block of the parts of Oakland with a view, and every time he saw a small home in bad condition, which would be the only ones that would be affordable, he left a handwritten note in the mailbox asking if the owner might be interested in selling. Alex left over 100 notes, got 3 responses, and 1 was acceptable. Not great. The rooms were small, only one room had a view, and as an older house the window was small, but it was affordable, barely. To make the deal close, Alex called on lots of his old lending officers until he twisted the arm of one to not only give her a loan, but at a good rate. But then the pest control report came in, $110,000. But he showed it to one of those fix-it guys he had long used, and the guy said, those pest control companies, I can do it for half that. And so, when Rebecca threw a party for her new house, Alex was the guest of honor. But on October 19th, 1991, the Oakland, California Fire Department failed to fully put out a grass fire, and 2,843 single-family homes and 437 apartments and condos were destroyed, including Rebecca's. Alex stood next to Rebecca, surveying what was left, the foundation, fireplace, and rubble. He said, "You will rebuild." And she replied, "No, we will." And 3 years later, thanks to the insurance, Rebecca had the home of her dreams, including from 3 rooms, big, beautiful views. Little postscript, I have lived in the Oakland Hills since 1976, 3 blocks from the fire area. Before the fire, most of the homes were modest. The rebuilt homes were mostly, and are mostly, mini mansions, some not so mini, rather hypocritical. Nearly everyone here in the Bay Area claims to be an environmentalist, yet when they get a chance to stick it to the insurance companies, they build an environmental monstrosity. Don King wrote, "Hypocrisy is the mother of all evil." Anyway, that story is called Closing. The next story is called Relieved. I'd been widowed a year and didn't feel like dating. Part was loyalty to my wife, but part was that I'm self-conscious about everything. My body, my memory, my failed sexuality. Better to just hang with my cat and a few guy friends. But as I was taking my evening constitutional, a woman from down the street who had lost her husband 2 years ago stopped me and asked, "Would you like to have coffee? Or maybe I can cook for you." I thought, cook for me? Uh-oh. That's a precursor to sex. But in that fraction of a second, I thought, stop. You can stop it at conversation. So I said, "Cook for me? That's so nice." When I got there, she was wearing something just alluring enough. Not too much, but it was a form-fitting dress that in Berkeley, Oakland was not part of the proletariat desexualized uniform. I liked it, but it got me nervous. Long story short, over linguine with clam sauce and white wine, we had the usual first date conversation. A bit about our late spouses, what we enjoy doing, and of course Donald Trump, the topic here in the Bay Area. At that awkward moment at the end of the evening, I said, I should go. I gave her the hug that signals no by patting her on the back as we hugged. I kind of liked her, but it said I'd call her more because it felt polite. I left relieved. I did call. We went for a walk, and when we returned to her front door after a silence, she asked, "Want to come in?" I actually didn't, but didn't want to seem like a wimp or hurt her feelings, so I nodded. We ended up on her sofa and snuggled, but that's it. I admitted to her that I was relieved that we weren't, quote, progressing. She smiled wryly. Me too. I then felt more comfortable and asked, "Want to go out to dinner?" She smiled, and I did too. This time, an honest smile. Anyway, that story is called Relieved. Next story is called Average Jane. In school, teachers focused on the brilliant and on the slow, so Average Jane was pretty much ignored. Jane's classmates liked the good-looking kids and made fun of the ugly ones. They barely noticed Average Jane. At her 50th high school reunion, most people didn't even remember her. In college, while Jane wanted a date, she felt uncomfortable trying to stand out, being perky, dressing sexily, and so on, so she was pretty much ignored. When Jane applied for jobs, her resume didn't stand out, so the best she could get was a rent-a-car reservationist, where she chatted little with customers or coworkers. She was forgettable. Jane joined a hiking group, but even when she approached people, the conversation quickly petered out and they would move on. Jane did have some modest romantic relationships, but sooner than later the guy would end it. When Janie asked for an explanation, they said things like, "There's nothing wrong with you. There's just not quite the spark." Jane thought that maybe she'd be special if she worked with disabled people, so she volunteered at a group home for people with intellectual disabilities. But she had difficulty helping them and got little recognition for her efforts, so after a few Saturdays, apologizing, she quit. Next, she tried volunteering in an animal shelter. She and the doggies loved each other, but that didn't feel enough. At the end of her 50th high school reunion, Jane trudged back to her car, gently closed the door, and cried. Would she die unexceptional, unrecognized? She sat trying to concoct a basis for hope. She considered dolling herself up, puffing herself up, bubbling herself up, but in the end decided that the wisest course was self-acceptance. Jane spent her last decade reading, journaling, gardening, painting, petting dogs at the shelter, and volunteering at a suicide hotline. A go-getter might have done more to improve her lot, but average Jane had just average drive. By definition, half of people have done worse. Anyway, that's Average Jane. This next one is called Ikebana Circle. Ikebana is the Japanese art of flower arranging. It integrates earth at the bottom, human in the middle, and sky at the top. Often it is framed by a circle. Lily's husband died at a good age, 86, and after an appropriate period of mourning, she decided that while still able, she would have an adventure. After all, her whole adult life, she was an Ikebana flower arranger, a life beautiful but free of adventure. So Lily took her modest inheritance and flew to San Francisco, where she knew a cafe waitress who had immigrated from her town and agreed to sponsor Lily, guaranteeing her a job. Lily started as a dishwasher and of course didn't like it as much as Ikebana, but accepted the need to start somewhere. And soon she was promoted to busser, setting tables, pouring coffee, clearing tables. At night, Lily made Ikebana, which she sold to restaurants and hotels. She did it not just for the money, although she certainly could use it with the exorbitant cost of living even in the Bay Area's bad areas, but it was spiritually renewing. Often Lily would bring an Ikebana to the cafe and put it on the table of a customer she liked. Her favorite was an old, quiet man, simply dressed. When she put the Ikebana on his table for the third time, he asked if she would like to take a walk with him sometime. Nervous, she just mumbled, "Thank you," and scurried off with her coffee pot. But the next time he came in, she said, "I would be honored to walk with you." Soon he invited her to his modest home. But after she agreed to move in with him, he said that he was a retired venture capitalist. She didn't know what that was, so he explained that his job was to find money for small businesses that promised to make the world better. They enjoyed the early December of their years. Indeed, honestly loved each other, even though sex for them couldn't go beyond kissing, cuddling, and fondling. And then he got Parkinson's. She not only didn't resent caring for him, she loved it, until the end, which wasn't as pleasant as her husband's, who had died peacefully in his sleep. He left his $26 million to her. She returned to Japan to live in her simple apartment and spent the rest of her life driving into the country, giving rural high school computer teachers in Ikebana. Inside its circle was a sky represented by a cherry blossom branch, a person by shiny leaves, and on its earth, 25 million yen, $200,000. All she said to the teachers was, "Give it to a student who could make the world better." So that's called the Ikebana Circle. The next story is called Knitting. After I got laid off at age 70, I tried to find work, but could get no better than a part-time minimum wage job as a library page. Despite years of psychotherapy, meditation, mindfulness, and so on, I found that the only way to keep my anxiety under control was to stay busy, distracting attention from my real and imagined woes. I was never an athlete and had no desire, for example, to take up golf, that staging area for the hereafter. Nor did I want to attend activities at the senior center. That would too acknowledge my place on life's conveyor belt. Watch more TV? Waste of time. I liked to be productive, but at what? I was never artsy. So other cliches were out. For example, the old man at his easel or wandering around with an outsized zoom lens creating the zillionth image of nature's eye candy. I flashed on my mother knitting a sweater. Too hard, too feminine. Can you just see me in a knitting circle? So I dismissed the idea. But knitting kept intruding. It's too hard. I'm retarded at visualizing. Maybe if it was just a scarf. That's just a rectangle. No changed angles. Maybe I should watch a YouTube video. And I did, but couldn't even get the basic knit and purl move. If I took a knitting class, it would be embarrassing. Not just being a man, but I'd be so bad at it. Should I hire a tutor? I'm sure some little old lady would come to my house. No, we'd have to meet in a park bench or something. She might think I'm a rapist. I thought about placing an ad for a tutor on Craigslist, but figured that little old ladies who knit are more likely to see an ad that was on an index card hung on some yarn store's bulletin board. So I went to 3 knitting stores, and 2 did have bulletin boards, and the other allowed me to tape my index card to the cash register counter. Not so old man, inept with crafty things, wants to see if he can learn to knit. Seeking a patient tutor, 510-122-2376. I returned home to find a message on my answering machine. Yeah, I still use an answering machine, not because I don't understand how to set up voicemail, but because I like to screen calls. Hello, I'm Marty Anderson. The owner of A Good Yarn phoned me to say you were looking for someone to show you how to knit. You're welcome to come to my apartment. I thought, well, there are 4 widows for every widower. Maybe she's eager. Feminist assertiveness has reached the senior set. And so I went to Marty's apartment, where I saw why she might have been forward. She's bedridden with MS. I was slow to pick up even basic knitting moves, but Marty was indeed patient. In showing me, increasingly, she seemed to hold my hand just a fraction of a second longer than required. And then one time she held it for a full second. I looked her in the eye, then, reminded I was on her bed, turned away, until once I didn't. And Marty and I met weekly for knitting lessons. Before long, I had made 4 scarves and sewed a label in each, Made with Love by Albert and Marty. Next story is called the Hillcrest Widow Club. The 4 women of the Hillcrest Widow Club met every Thursday morning at 9 in the corner of a quiet coffee shop. Their statements about their deceased husbands started politely. For example, Mary said, "Yes, it's difficult, but I'm trying to muddle through." But slowly their fear of being seen cold faded. But what really opened things up was when Zoe said, "Honestly, I'm relieved to be rid of that ball and chain." Brittany then felt free to pile on. "Don't we like talking with each other more than with men? We care more about family, feelings, and okay fashion. The successful men mainly want to talk about their work. The unsuccessful ones about stupid sports." Further emboldened, Zoe said, "Yeah, and they just care about getting in and out, assuming they can get it up, which for the last decade my husband couldn't, and I had to pretend it was okay." 2 of the other women nodded. That encouraged Zoe to admit that she had fantasies about lesbian sex. Okay, more than fantasies. Before long, they decided they needed more privacy, so they met in Zoe's plush living room. Mary asked, "How could you afford this?" Zoe replied, "My husband was a lawyer who had 1 client, but a great one, the Environmental Protection Agency." After a glass of wine or bong hit, Zoe moved close to Willow, the member who seemed most likely to be willing to kiss. Zoe looked her in the eye, and when Willow didn't avert, Zoe kissed her as the others watched wide-eyed. Would Willow pull back? On the contrary, she sighed in pleasure. But Zoe sensed it was too fast, not just for Willow, but for the others, so Zoe pulled back and asked if someone would like another hit or glass of wine. But 3 Zoe meetings later, they all, and I mean all, had a cuddly experience. But after that, Mary whispered something that shocked the others. "I love our Widows Club, but every so often I wonder, are men so bad that we're fine with bashing them? We wouldn't criticize women, let alone BIPOCs, that is, black and indigenous people of color. If I did, I'd get the 3 C's, censure, censor, or cancel. Atop that in so many news shows, and especially movies, TV shows, novels, some spunky, smart woman triumphs over an evil or clueless guy. And when women have the deficit, say we're so-called underrepresented in science, there's massive redress and, yes, reverse discrimination. I know a number of women who got jobs over more competent, harder-working guys. Okay, so did I. Yet when men have the ultimate deficit, they live 6 years shorter than women, their last decade in worse health. And there are 4.4 widows for every widower. All we see is another run for breast cancer. Over the next few meetings, the others began to shun Mary. It was subtle, a little less eye contact, a little more interrupting, and unlike before, no one asked her to get together between meetings. Sad at being ostracized, Mary figured that it isn't a big deal to play the game. She even told anti-male jokes. What do you call a man with half a brain? Gifted. What's the difference between government bonds and men? Bonds, mature. What's the difference between a man and a catfish? One is a bottom-feeding scum-sucker, and the other is a fish. And soon, Mary was back in the fold. That's the Hillcrest Widows Club. The next one is called The Last Taboo. Even as a teenager, I found myself less enthusiastic in bed than were my sexual partners. Even when able to get an erection, I was silent except for grunts at orgasm. Meanwhile, my partners would, nearly throughout, be, well, noisy. As I got older, even in my 20s, not only did my desire decline, so did my erections. And after just a month of marrying, my wife and I felt the need to go to a sex therapist. But all the exercises, analysis, and peacock feathers didn't help, and she divorced me 2 days before my 30th birthday. In my early 30s, I dated a number of women, hoping to find one that could sustainably turn me on. But after the first time or two with a woman, my desire waned and my fear of failure increased enough that I would break up. I wished that I were gay. That would explain the problem and provide hope that I could have a sex life. But no, I found men even less sexually attractive than women. By my mid-30s, I decided to stop dating. I felt the pain of facing sexual failure was too great to compensate for the advantages of having a partner. Yes, I had female friends, but made clear I didn't want a sexual relationship. Through my 40s and 50s, I felt great sadness as my friends, the media, everywhere I turned, seemed to yell that the world revolved around sex and that I was being deprived of one of life's great pleasures. I, who used to be rather upbeat and at least moderately social, was getting sadder and chose to spend ever more time alone. In my 60s, my aging increasingly beset me, which deepened my sadness and made me spend ever more time alone. I did visit porn sites, but that gave me only a sliver of the sexual pleasure I imagined that most of the world experienced. Throughout my life, I felt I couldn't discuss my problem. Although people could talk about everything from group sex to S&M, no one ever admitted they had low sex drive, which is different from impotence. Not only did I not get erections, I didn't care to have them. I call low sex drive the last taboo. Recently, however, I discovered asexuality.org, which describes itself as the largest asexual community in the world. That's brought me out of my seclusion. Anyway, that's called the last taboo, and the final story is Albert and Morty say goodbye. I'm going down fast. I'm sorry. I'm not sure that's a bad thing. Better quick than protracted. I'm grateful that I think I have some time left. Quality time? You seem okay. Seem. Anything you want to do with the time you have left? I guess savor each moment, a flower, music, talking with you. So you'll miss me when I'm gone? Of course I'll miss you, dodo head. I'll miss you too. I have a premonition this is the last time we'll talk before they cart me away to the hospital or the morgue. What should we do? How about holding hands? And they do. Morty said, now tell me what you'll most miss about me. Your kindness. The world seems ever shorter on kindness. What do you miss about me? Your gentle curmudgeonliness. You're so out of step with the times. But I'm right. My views will stand the test of time. I think you're right, but won't talking about it now taint the time we have left? Kiss me. And Albert leans toward her but loses his balance. Morty pushes his med alert button. An attendant comes in and lifts him back into his chair. And Albert says, would you wheel me closer to Morty? The attendant does. Albert tries to kiss her on the cheek, but gets scared he'll fall. So he kisses her hand, and they cry. Anyway, that's Albert and Morty say goodbye. As usual, I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs. Those are 10 stories from my book, Senior Stories. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. And certainly would welcome you taking a look at any of my 34 books. As I said, the most relevant to this would be Senior Stories, but all 34 are on Amazon. In any event, I'd like to end these. This is going to be a podcast, so I'd like to end all my podcasts with this, my very favorite quote that I believe is more relevant now than ever, from Frank A. Clark. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.